Now, for the Hansard record, could you each please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
I'm AIRMSHL Errol McCormack, retired Chairman of the Williams Foundation.
And AIRMSHL Geoff Brown, retired Deputy Chairman of the Williams Foundation.
Now, would you like to make a brief opening statement before we go to questions?
Yes, if you don't mind, I'll make a brief statement.
Thank you.
I just want to make a couple of points on the acquisition of the F-35 before taking questions. The F-35 should not be considered just another fighter replacing Hornets in service. The F-35 will be a communications node capable of sharing information electronically between sections of the force. That fact has already been the catalyst for a change in thinking on development of the Air Force through Plan Jericho. The plan was named after Operation Jericho, knocking down the walls of a Gestapo prison in France, but now knocking down the walls between elements of the Air Force as well as the Navy and Army. While each Air Force system, such as airborne early warning and control aircraft, ground electronic warning systems, or tankers by themselves are very capable, but if used in an integrated system will change the way the Air Force operates. The ability to share the operational picture between systems will ensure that commanders have the best possible information and enable aircraft to engage enemy based on other than their own picture. For example, a Hornet could use an F-35 derived picture to engage a target. Development of similar systems on ships and ground-based systems is also underway. Plan Jericho is designed to make people think of using a system of systems when planning acquisition, concepts of operations and training. An integrated Australian Defence Force is greater than the sum of the parts, and acquisition of the F-35 has been the catalyst for this change in thinking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Fawcett, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'd be interested in your thinking, gentlemen, about the Joint Strike Fighter in the face of developing not just future threats in terms of aircraft, but also ground-based air defence systems. It's been suggested that post-Iraq, where the US so convincingly defeated all of the ex-Soviet area, Russian-supported systems that were there, but they've invested a lot of time in multi-mode radars to have different modalities.
Senator Conroy just signing in.
Thank you, Senator Conroy.
Detect and complete the kill chain for their very long-range missiles, SA-23 and others, as well as very specific weapons, looking at high-speed, long-range missiles to take out ISR capabilities, as well as to defeat some of the anti-radiation missiles that were used. So all of that paints a picture where what the JSF is purported to bring to the fight to be able to do its ground attack role, it seems now that there are a lot of very specific technologies arrayed against it. Could you comment on the impact that will have on the Joint Strike Fighter's ability to be a strike fighter?
Yeah, certainly. AIRMSHL Geoff Brown, retired. I'd probably like to just go back a little bit because there's been a lot of assertions made about fighter-on-fighter capabilities
well, can we leave fighter-on-fighter?
Okay.
We talk about the ground first.
But I think it actually probably goes to your argument a little bit in that there's a lot of mythical assertions about the capability of Russian equipment. And if you even have a look at the stealth associated with PAK-FA and the Chinese variants, there's orders of magnitude difference between it and the F-35. Certainly,
on what basis do you make that comment?
Okay.
Well, because I've just asked other witnesses
for sure,
how they get their facts. How do you get your facts?
Well, I've been privileged to classified briefings that have actually analysed what those stealth characteristics on all those aeroplanes are. So, but even at an unclassified level, you've really only got to look at the front cross-section of the PAK-FA to see that that it's got some square corner radar reflectors right on the front on the IRST. The fact that it runs flying canards at the front as well is a factor. If you look at the rear end of the J-20, again, you've only got to have a look at the way the fin structure is to see that it's not a true stealth capability.
Mm-hmm. Okay, please go on.
Okay, so Yeah, they're threats that need to be taken into account, because what the Russians have done has gone down in lower frequencies. But you still can't target missiles with high-frequency radars or lower band radars. So you still need to be able to for target acquisition, you need to be up around that X band, which is where the JSF is optimised for. So it's certainly got a better capability than any other airplane to go against those sort of threats.
My understanding from the Swedish analysis of their future requirements was that the reason they opted to go for Gripen 2 was that their own development of radars in the surface-to-air role indicated to them that stealth would not be the advantage that everyone believed it would be into the future, which is part of the reason they opted to go with a lower-cost multi-role aircraft, being the second version of Gripen. Given that very technologically competent Western nations are making that assessment, why are you so convinced that the Russian equipment is so far behind that it will never pose that threat?
I'm not talking specifically about surface-to-air, but you'll also notice that we actually have acquired EA-18G Growlers as well. So I'd actually see that whatever the particular surface-to-air missile threat, you'd have a look at the combination of JSF or Growler or independently target it that way.
According to Boeing's own, I'll use the word propaganda, their own marketing, clearly seeking to expand the sales of Super Hornet and the Growler. There's a number of slides available from presentations they've done that show the all-aspect jamming that Growler can achieve versus what they maintain as a very narrow band in one direction only from JSF. And yet the argument that's put to us is that the JSF can operate largely independently using its own radar to provide that kind of ability to penetrate an air defence, and particularly an integrated air defence system.
Look, I'd characterise that the JSF has a very useful capability against independent surface-to-air missiles, but if you're coming up against a fully integrated system, you've actually got to look at everything that you've got to defeat that sort of system. Again, it's very scenario dependent, and a lot of the argument around the JSF, you know, a large number of their assertions on its capability don't take account of the full capability that we're looking at. You know, if I was to use a historical example of Battle of Britain, you know, it's often asserted that the Spitfire was the winning capability. When you really have a look at it, it was the British radar system and their ability to intercept German aircraft. It was a systems-to-systems approach which really gave them the advantage. It wasn't an individual aeroplane.
Mm-hmm. From a cost perspective, one of the, if you look at the defence submission, it's mentioned probably 3 or 4 times that the Joint Strike Fighter is one of the most capable and affordable systems we're seeing to date, that both in terms of the AILS but also the overall cost of operation, that it's very high, and in fact in the defence submissions it indicates that they're struggling to get that cost down, you know, right next to the paragraph that says it's one of the most affordable aircraft. Does the Williams Foundation have a view about the desirability of having a mixed fleet, as I look at what the British have done, for example, where they have just procured 2 additional squadrons of Typhoon as well as their investment in JSF? Do you think we are wise to be heading towards a sole-type fleet of 100 aircraft as opposed to having a, if you like, an asymmetric capability of an alternate platform that perhaps is cheaper to procure and run?
I'll probably answer that on two bases, Senator. You know, the Typhoon is very much a sunk cost for the UK, so I think if I was in their position, I'd probably do something similar. I think one of the misconceptions with the JSF is over cost. You know, if you read in the press and a lot of the articles about the cost blowouts, certainly there was additional money added to the SDD, but one of the great advantages for us was that we had a fixed input cost to the SDD, so it hasn't actually cost Australia any additional money for the additional money that the US has put in. If you look at the cost, and again, defence officials would be better to comment on this, but I think our first 2 cost us $118 million US. the majority that we'll get will be somewhere around the $90 million US in acquisition costs. The previous speaker was quite correct in that acquisition costs are only about 1/3. You're normally looking at 2/3 of the cost over the sustainment. But again, the last time I looked at it, I think the sustainment cost will probably only going to average 10 to 15% more than our legacy fighters. And when you look at the additional capability you get with the jet, I think that that's not unreasonable in the way that it's done.
I mean, my read of Defence's submission and the DOT&E report and other statements coming out of the US is that that trajectory towards even 10 or 15% above legacy is certainly not assured at the moment. At what point would we look at that through life cost and make a decision that a single fleet is not the best choice?
I think you'd look at that all the time, but I'd say we're at the stage that we're at with the JSS, where the SDD still hasn't finished. It's pretty early days, and if I look at all the other aircraft procurements that we've done probably in the last 5 to 10 years, the initial operation of those aeroplanes, the cost has been quite high. The KC-30 was a classic example of how that cost burned down pretty quickly once we took it into operation.
My last question, Chair. It's been put to us in one of the submissions that Australia should invest more in the test and evaluation phase in the SD&D rather than just the operational tests, so we understand the capabilities and limitations more fully. Defence's submission make the point that it's such a complex and broad capability that only the US has the ability to do that T&E. I contest that statement. Going on past practice, which I'm sure you're aware of, we have been deeply involved with T&E programs with the states and have added a lot of value to it and have uncovered many areas where we haven't been given the full information despite our close alliance with the states. Does the Williams Foundation have a view on whether Australia should be exercising its sovereign right for knowledge and insight and insisting on a greater involvement in the earlier stages of T&E?
I think that was probably an option at one stage in the program, but for various reasons we chose not to go down that path. Going forward, which I think is where we should look at, we already have 2 people flying the aircraft. I was actually talking to the Deputy Commandant of the US Marines last week, and he is actually going to offer us an exchange on the air variant of the F-18 at some time this year or early next year.
But Air Marshal Brown, a flying instructor or an operational squadron pilot is a very different creature and very different outcomes to somebody who actually understands the technical certification and identifying risk.
I agree totally, Senator, but maybe I'll go back to the AEW&C. I think if we'd actually left that in the hands of the test committee, we'd still be flying round balls measuring radar cross sections and not have an operational capability. At some point in time, you've actually got to make that change over.
But if you had invested, Air Marshal Brown, test capability early enough in your air-to-air refuelling, you would have circumvented a number of the problems with the aircraft. I'd argue that Defence has traditionally undersold and underinvested in its test capability on the assumption that we will buy a mature product from someone else. And I can look at Tiger as a classic example, air-to-air refuelling is an example. And given the problem we've seen with the development of this aircraft to date, the refusal to invest in that area causes me deep concern.
Well, I think you can argue either way. In the end game, if you look at the overall result, we have a very highly capable air-to-air refueler. We have the most advanced AEW&C in the world. We have got there. Could we have got there a year or 2 earlier with additional test points? Maybe, but you're still dependent on the manufacturer to actually produce the goods.
Okay, at that point we'll go to Senator Conroy in the ether, and then Senator Whish-Wilson and Senator Xenophon are waiting patiently. So, Senator Conroy, are you there? Well, that didn't work. So, Senator Xenophon?
Can I just ask to the Foundation, I note that on your website you have a dozen sponsors. One of them is Lockheed Martin. You've been quite transparent about it. How big a sponsor are they to your organisation?
I'll take that. They are a regular sponsor. They support us each year. The way we do it is we pick subjects to run seminars, and like the last seminar was last week, which was Airland. Lockheed Martin was not a sponsor.
Yeah, but I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's terrific you've been up front. But how big is, I mean, there's a dozen sponsors. Are they 10% of your income, of your revenue as an organisation? How big?
We have various levels. A gold sponsor is 20,000, a silver sponsor is 15, and a bronze sponsor is 10. Yeah. And that's a standard format that we use. And we regularly get people coming and suggesting topics to us that we should do, and they tend to give us towards the gold. Most of the sponsorships are in the 10 to 15,000.
And that's similar to Lockheed Martin's as silver or gold sponsor then?
Yeah.
It'll depend on the scenario as to which seminar we're doing.
All right, so they sponsor individual seminars?
Yes.
So how many seminars do they sponsor each year?
Well, we're only holding 2 this year, and they didn't sponsor the first one. We also have a membership as well that pays, but also we have companies that become on as a yearly sponsor, which is $5,000. We run lunches that are free for members, that brings them along to that sort of thing. But yeah, we're not in the big bucks business.
Okay, so it's not your biggest sponsor.
No, why not?
No.
As I said, they didn't sponsor us at all at the last one.
Yeah, it's fine. Can I just go, your submission spends time referencing the F-35 against the F-18 Hornet. I can understand this, that's where your experience may lie, but it's not an F-18 Hornet that our future Air Force will face. Would you agree that we should be comparing the F-35 to other aircraft such as the T-50, the PAK-FA, the J-20, the Su-35S? Is that a fair comparison?
I agree, but I've kind of, maybe unlike a lot of the cubicle commandos around the place, I actually have had the privilege of flying a lot of the...
Yeah, I'm not even suggesting I'm a cubicle commando.
No. I don't say that, but... Yeah. I have flown most of the 4th generation fighters that are actually in existence, the Typhoon, the Su-30 MKI, and even the Gripen as well. So I think I'm in a pretty reasonable space to make comparisons.
Okay, so on that basis, Air Power Australia suggested that that your foundation may have been briefed in relation to the F-22 and F-35, pitted against each other with experienced pilots trying to establish air control. Which do you think would likely win?
An F-22 versus an F-35?
Yes.
Yeah, that's an interesting discussion. I think the dynamics of the F-22, because it can go faster, it could launch its missiles a little earlier. So in most combat scenarios, an F-22 would be superior to an F-35. And I had a discussion with a couple of F-22 pilots probably last year, and it probably goes to some of the criticism of the F-35. They actually say that coming to the merge where 2 aeroplanes actually come...
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Coming to the merge where 2 aeroplanes come close together before you engage in close-in combat, they'd actually rather be in an F-35 because of its helmet-mounted sight. An F-22 needs an upgrade to a helmet-mounted sight.
But it's an upgrade, though. It's not a...
Yeah, but it's a significant upgrade.
Just because of time constraints.
Yeah.
You're familiar with Air Power Australia's submission in terms of their table. I would like you to comment on that shortly. In their submission, they have the F-22 better by some margin. If that could be given to the witnesses, Chair. It also places the F-35 behind some of the other threat aircraft that are or might appear in our region. Noting your submission is quite supportive, glowing of the F-35, can you please tell me the areas in which you consider the Air Power Australia's 0-1 comparative chart is wrong in any way?
Yeah, I don't give it a lot of credibility, to be honest.
Why is that?
But because it goes through very individual factors, and even on those individual factors, it gets some of the things wrong.
Can you give us an example?
Saying that a T-50's electronically scanned array radar is better than an F-35 is just patently wrong.
Well, in fairness, Air Power have gone to the trouble of preparing this chart, and because of time constraints, it may be useful to, because I think given that they've gone through this exercise, can you on notice provide a critique of this where you consider that it's not that helpful, but you don't even find it useful as a comparison?
No. In fact, I think if you actually just even Googled it up on the internet, you could actually find quite reasonable critiques of this particular chart.
Okay, but I'm asking your foundation,
we can do that.
And its reputation, which has a good reputation. Thank you.
Senator Conroy. Hello. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Yeah, Senator Conroy's fine.
Okay, fire away. We're running slightly behind time, Senator Conroy, but we'll run into the tea break.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I'm full. Go for Whish-Wilson.
Okay. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Thank you. Following up from Senator Xenophon's question about the F-22, you've probably seen the comments made by General Michael Hostage, the USAF Commander of Air Combat Command. He made them last year. He said, if I do not keep the F-22 fleet viable, the F-35 fleet frankly will be irrelevant. The F-35 is not built as an air superiority platform. It needs the F-22. Firstly, do you agree with that? And secondly, we don't have an F-22. Do we have another aircraft that could fill that role in supporting the F-35?
I don't agree with those comments. It's pretty, actually, they're just taken a little bit out of context.
Okay, well, please explain the context.
And a lot of the context was about General Hostage was actually fighting for the upgrade on the F-22, particularly probably going to the helmet-mounted sight issue on the F-22. So I think you've got to take those comments in that context.
They're pretty strong comments.
They are, but I think if you actually read the full context, he does walk away from them. He has walked away from them since. In fact, I could probably get you a copy of subsequent comments that he's made.
Okay. So in terms of the F-22, can you explain to the committee why the US didn't want to sell it? I understand Congress made that decision, but what was the logic behind them not sharing that with their ANZUS partners like Australia?
I think that there was largely a political move around the technology. They just didn't want to share aspects of the technology. The aeroplane was never built to be exportable in terms of anti-tamper devices, so that some of the technology could not be reverse engineered. The difference with the F-35 is it's been built to be an exportable aircraft. And I think it's probably one of the main reasons.
And that's it. It couldn't have been made exportable, the F-22.
It certainly could have been made exportable, but again, when you go back into reverse engineering, that comes at a degree of cost.
Okay, it's interesting that the kind of technology we've been told the F-35 has, which is superior to anything around, is able to be shared with partners or customer countries, but the F-22 wasn't. And we have had a number of submissions that have suggested that we just try and buy the F-22 and walk away from the F-35. So it is quite important for us to get to the bottom of why that plane's not available. But that would be it as far as you're concerned.
Well, to my mind, it's out of production, and really, in many respects, it's 15 to 20 years older in technology. There are many characteristics that the F-35 is actually superior to the F-22. It's far, and probably the biggest one from our point of view is that the stealth coatings are far more maintainable on the F-35 than they are on the F-22.
Is there any characteristics that the F-35 is not superior to the F-22?
Well, I think in straight aerodynamic performance, the F-22 is a superior aeroplane.
Okay.
But when you look at the ability to link and network, the F-35's superior. It's superior from a maintainability point of view, and from a maintenance cost point of view, it's a superior aeroplane. Yet it has a lot of the characteristics of the F-22. The stealth characteristics between the two aeroplanes is not much difference.
But the F-35 was designed to be more, though, wasn't it? Like it wasn't. It was designed to be all things to all people.
A multi-role aeroplane, which is pretty much what Australia's picked since the end of World War II. For all our aeroplanes, we've needed a multi-role capability.
Like the Super Hornets or
Super Hornet, the Sabre, the Meteor before it. Most of our Mustang, they've all been multi-role aeroplanes.
do I call you Mr. Brown or Air Chief Marshal Brown? Either way, Geoff is fine. How confident are you with the statements being made by DoD at the moment that we will have the F-35 operational over that time frame, 2019 to 2023?
I'm particularly confident. Two factors that make me confident. One, I had a good discussion with the Deputy Commandant of the Marine Aviation last week, and he told me all the progress that they'd actually made with the F-35, even with the 2B software. I've talked to our two pilots that are flying the F-35.
The ones on 60 Minutes?
Yeah, those two. And I suppose the other factor is the SDD program finishes in, I think it's May 17. We really don't take the aeroplanes back until December 18. Even if the program slips in the time frames that the Gilmore OT&E report talks about, we are still have scheduled float in before we get the majority of our aeroplanes.
Okay. Can I ask you quickly about a couple of other... I've plucked some criticisms of the F-35 from different submissions. One submission said the F-35 can't support ground forces effectively. It said in the way that, for example, the F-22 supported Marines going into Iraq. Because ground forces are non-stealthy, and in supporting them, the F-35 makes itself non-stealthy, giving up its major advantage of stealth and BVR beyond visual dominance. Do you think they're vulnerable in that role, and do you think that role is necessary for Australia's defence?
Again, it was an interesting discussion I had with the Deputy Commandant of the Marines. He talked about his legacy aeroplanes, which were F-18s, and some of the scenarios they've actually just run in the last couple of months, where they've actually run the F-35 against a high-end surface-to-air missiles system, similar to what Senator Fawcett was talking about. And they had two F-35s clean and two with weapons, and they were able to do close air support in a very contested environment, which is something they couldn't do with their legacy aeroplanes. So as far as they're concerned, the capability of the aeroplane is much better for fighting high-end conflict than the F-18 was.
And with that, what do they mean exactly by supporting ground forces?
Well, because the stealth characteristics of the F-35 meant that it could actually deal with the high-end SAM, and then they could go in and do close air support with the F-35.
So they'd have to take out the SAMs first, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's the normal procedure.
Okay.
Take them out or avoid them, one of the two.
Okay.
And when you're doing close air support, you can't avoid it.
Just in relation to the software, an issue, came from submission 8, an issue that affects all the international partners in the F-35 involves access to the computer software codes for the aircraft. The F-35 relies heavily on software for operation of radar, weapons, flight control and also maintenance. The US military has stated that no country involved in the development of the jets will have access to the software codes, has indicated that all the software upgrades will be done in the US. Does this bother you at all? Well, I understand this software issue was a big issue back with the Super Hornets.
Yeah, but it's an incorrect statement, because we will have people involved in the reprogramming lab. And again, I'm not the best person to talk to about this. Air Vice Marshal Chris Deeble could probably give you in their submission the details of the reprogramming lab, but we will have access to that code in the United States through that reprogramming lab.
In the United States, so we won't actually have the codes here in Australia. They'll be in the United States.
No, but our people
but we'll have access to them.
Yeah, there's actually an allocation of people to be in the United States doing that.
Okay, that's it for me, Chair.
All right, thank you very much for your evidence. If you have taken questions on notice, a reasonable and appropriate amount of time is allowed for your considered response. And we will now break for a period of 15 minutes to give our handside people relief.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chairman.